So tonight, we have with us Florida Family Voice, and they are going throughout the whole state to be able to communicate concerning Amendment 4. Now, we are not here today to endorse political candidates. We are not doing that. And for you that have been with us for a while, you understand that we go through a town hall, we vet things, we communicate, and ultimately we inform you so that you are the most informed and what I considered educated people when it comes to elections in our county. The resources that are made available to you really gives you the context to be able to know accurately how to vote from a local level all the way up to a national level. But tonight we're talking about an amendment to our Constitution in our state. You understand we are not a democracy in the United States. We are a constitutional republic, which means our Constitution is what governs how our lawmakers create law. And so if we start making an amendment to the Constitution of Florida, then it hinders the way laws are made. So constitutional amendments should always be taken first as no, let's investigate, before we just say yes. But you understand, and we've been teaching this all year, that we are in the time of doctrines of demons and seducing spirits. And so there's a lot of things being said today that sound good, but they are, in essence, masking or being deceptive, okay? And the church should voice God's position. This is not my opinion. This will not be the individuals that will speak their opinions on the matter. They will be communicating to you things from Scripture and how this amendment is drafted in such a way that it's very problematic for our state. And so we're going to be informed. Again, I can tell you emphatically how I would vote, but at the end of the day, you're going to make that choice. No one tonight is going to tell you that you can't vote a different way. You are a free will moral agent. If Jesus Christ will allow you to go to the lake of fire, then you know what? We sure are not going to be able to say you have to vote on this amendment this way. You understand that? Jesus gives you the ability to accept him as Lord or not. We're going to give you, but he still gives you the information. Does he not? He said, I am the way, the truth, and there is no other way to the Father. So he just cut out every other religion, made it very clear. It's not confusing, okay? But at the end of the day, you still have to choose. We're going to give information that at the end of the day, I think it's not confusing, but you will have to make the choice, okay? So Florida Family Voice is here. This is their Florida Family Voice Voice for Life tour. And so they had actually another engagements this week, but because of the hurricane, they reached out to us and said, hey, could we come and speak? And it just seemed right that we just do service. Amen. Because at the end of the day, we want to be the most informed, empowered people so that when we vote, we have a conscience of why we're voting the way we're voting. So would you do an Anchor Faith welcome for Mr. Doug, the chairman of Florida Family Voice, as he comes. Thank you, sir.
There we go. All right. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to Anchor Faith Church. Thank you so much for allowing us to be with you, worship with you, and share with you this evening. Thank you, Pastor Earl, Pastor Marcy. You got to go on tour with us, brother. You got it down. You have got it down. So And thank you and welcome to us. I am Bruce O'Donohue. I am the chairman of Florida Family Voice. We are a 21-year-old organization founded about faith, about life, about marriage, about family, and about religious liberty. That is what we're about. Now, it was Florida Family Policy Council, which is a tongue twister, and if you say it fast 3 times, it will twist you up. And we changed our voice this year to Florida Family Voice because we are the voice in Florida. And we want to make sure everyone is educated and informed on all the issues that are taking place. Now, before us this evening, we're going to be talking about Amendment 4. And Amendment 4 is all about allowing in the state constitution abortion on demand. And you're going to learn some things that you really aren't familiar with tonight. There's some things you're going to, it's going to affect you. And you're going to want to do something about it. And let me just share a couple of things about me real quick and then who we are a little bit more. So I'm a native Floridian. My family goes back to 1898. I'm not sure which country we got kicked out of, but we made it in Florida and settled here. And I tell the story about my life. I was born in a Roman Catholic hospital. I was baptized as an infant in the Methodist Church. I was confirmed as an Episcopalian as a young adult. I was married in the Presbyterian Church, and I was discipled by Campus Crusade for Christ and Dr. Bill Bright. I wear it all. Wear it all. I want to introduce to you some of the folks who have made this happen, some of our team members. Abby Blevins is our office manager. Dr. Kevin Baird will be one of our speakers tonight. He is the executive director of our Church Ambassador Network. Aaron DiPietro is our director of legislative affairs. Chris Yates is our development director. Also with us is Sarah Johnson, who will be a speaker. She's with the Committee on Vote No on 4. Eric Dellenbach is the governor's liaison to the Faith and Community. Eric, help me out. What is it? Faith and Community Initiative. Thank you. Sorry about that. You're going to learn a lot about that too. And with Eric and the Governor's Faith and Community Initiative are A.J. Hamilton and Dylan Fisher. And so, folks, we want you to get to know. And one little piece I want to add to this, Angel Gonzalez is our driver. So we lease this bus. And when you leave here, you're going to see this. We have to call it a coach because it's not really a bus, it's a coach. So it's not a football coach, it's a coach that you drive miles and miles. And we have driven thousands of miles already with thousands to go. We are on a mission from God. Sounds like the Blues Brothers, but this is a holy mission, okay? This is a holy mission. And you'll understand why a little bit later. But Angel volunteered to be our driver. He is lover of the Lord, he and his wife, and they've got a new baby son that's a month old. So Angel is just a wonderful saintly brother, part of our team. And so, and also with us is Jim Subers, the president of Vision Orlando. And so we've got a great team, and I want to say thank you. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'll tell the story. When I'm a family of 4 children. I'm in the middle. One day, when I was 5 years old, our family started going to church regularly on Sundays, and one day I had lunch with my mother, just all by myself. Nobody else, just my mother and me, and we started talking. And I started asking questions about God, about Jesus, about heaven, about hell. And one thing my mother said to me that day, she said, "Bruce, the devil is a liar. He is a liar." And you're going to hear some of the lies that are going on this evening. So I just wanted to prepare you. The devil's a liar, and we're dealing with lies. So with that, I'd like to introduce our Director of Legislative Affairs, Aaron DiPietro. He's going to give you a history and coach you a little bit. So Aaron, come on, brother.
Good evening. Thank you, Bruce. How are you guys doing tonight? Okay, you're in the house of the Lord. Let's hear, how are you guys doing tonight? There we go. There we go. My name is Aaron DiPietro. I'm the Legislative Affairs Director for Florida Family Voice. I have many titles, but none more important to me than husband to Sophia and daddy to little Laura. They are with me here tonight at this tour stop, so I'm extremely grateful for that. So before we dig into just the depths of the battle over good and evil that we're dealing with Amendment 4 tonight, and not only the dangers of it, but what you can be able to do about it, I want to kind of lay a little bit of a history background for where we got to where we are right now and why this matters. So number one, I want to talk about the history of abortion law here in the state of Florida. Number two, I want to go over what the current law is, and I want to dispel some of the lies that have been spread through the media and online about what the current state of our law is here in Florida. Number three, I want to talk about what Florida is doing to stand for life and to support the mothers and babies here in the state of Florida in a phenomenal and incredible way. Number four, I want to address the breadth of abortion law, just so you can get a picture of what is at stake here. And then finally, and actually, Pastor already stole it from me a little bit, but I'll give a little bit of a rehash of a little Civics 101 lesson on why this is such an important fight that we cannot avoid. So if we can go to the first slide here. So we're going to hang on to your seats. We're going to be going through 50 years of history in about 2.5 minutes. So going back to 1973, the infamous federal Supreme Court case Roe v. Wade, where the federal Supreme Court out of thin air found a right to abortion in our U.S. Constitution, and many people do not know this, is that not only Roe v. Wade opened abortion in the early stages of pregnancy, but actually allowed states to be able to allow late-term abortion all the way up until the moment of birth. That was within the federal Roe v. Wade decision. Moving forward to 1980, the Florida voters passed the Privacy Amendment into our state constitution. So we have the national constitution, and then we have our state constitution. That became Article 1, Section 23 of our constitution. And this was in kind of the era of Watergate, and where, Big Brother voters were concerned about government intruding into their private data and wiretapping and bank fraud. And they were like, we want to make sure that we are protecting our information and keeping it private from government intrusion. That was the purpose of this amendment in 1980. It had nothing whatsoever to do with abortion. Moving forward to 1988, the legislature at the time under Governor Bob Martinez passed the first Parental Consent for Minors Act, so that when a minor girl would seek an abortion, she had to have the written consent of a parent or guardian. Very seemingly straightforward common sense law that the vast majority of Floridians, both then and now, support. But then the following year, our state Supreme Court, in another lesser known case, In Re TW, decided to strike down that law. And what was the basis for this? Well, they went back to the 1980 Privacy Amendment that was dealing with informational privacy, and they found out of thin air a right to abortion, and not just any right to an abortion, but a super-powered right to abortion that went even beyond the federal Roe v. Wade case. And that was the basis which they struck down the basic common sense Parental Consent for Minors Act. But the Florida voters pushed back in 2002 with the Parental Notification Amendment to our state constitution, saying that whenever a minor would be receiving an abortion, that the parent or guardian had to be notified. Now again, hold on to there is a difference between parental consent and parental notification. That'll be very important. We'll talk about that a little bit later. In 2019, our state Supreme Court had a major shift to a body that respected our state constitution and that was not interested in legislating from the bench. Following that, the legislature passed in 2020 another Parental Consent for Minors Act, a very similar law to the law that was originally passed in 1988. Again, saying that if a minor were to seek an abortion, the parent or guardian would have to give written consent. The state legislature went even further in 2022, passing the Pain Capable Protection Act, banning late-term abortion here in the state of Florida after 15 weeks, when it is scientifically factual and not debated at all that an unborn baby can feel pain. Fast forwarding a little bit later, just a few months in that year, with the Dobbs case, where the Supreme Court on the federal level struck down the Roe v. Wade case, saying that no, state legislators do have the right to be able to provide protections for mothers and their babies in the early stages of pregnancy. And then in light of that, the Florida state legislature the following year passed the Heartbeat Protection Act, which we'll talk about in a little more detail in just a moment, protecting babies after 6 weeks gestation when a detectable heartbeat can be found. And then earlier this year in April, in the case Planned Parenthood of Southwest and Central Florida v. Florida, the state Supreme Court struck down their prior case, the In re TW case from 1989, saying there is no right to abortion in our state constitution. However, sadly, the same day that they had that good ruling, they also allowed Amendment 4 to be placed on the November ballot that we're going to be facing, which is why we are here tonight. So if we can go to the next slide. So I want to talk about myths versus facts. This is a great QR code. You guys are welcome to get your phones out and just take a snapshot of this. This is from the Agency for Healthcare Administration, which is the agency responsible for overseeing healthcare and medical regulations here in the state of Florida, breaking down some of the myths versus facts on Florida's abortion law, the Heartbeat Protection Act. So number one, I'm going to just go over some facts here. Number one, this bill is not a ban on abortion. It is not. And again, I'm just giving you the facts. I'm not saying I rejoice in this or I'm happy about this, but the fact is, this is not a ban on abortion. 46,000 abortions approximately occur every year before 6 weeks gestation or before a detectable heartbeat can be found. That's 54% of abortions in the state of Florida. So again, as we were talking about Satan being the father of lies, anyone tells you that the current abortion law bans abortion is not telling you the truth. Number two, and you've probably seen a lot of ads saying that Florida's law has no exceptions and that it's just a complete total ban, and that again is another falsehood as well. And again, I'm not saying this gives me joy, I'm just saying what the state of the law is right now. There are exceptions for rape, incest, human trafficking, the life of the mother, risk of physical impairment, and fatal fetal abnormality. That is the facts of what is Florida law right now. Some other myths, that women are going to be jailed in large numbers, for seeking abortions. And again, this is false as well. Florida's criminal penalties do not apply to pregnant mothers here in the state of Florida. And this is another myth here that I'll bring up because it was mentioned a few weeks ago on the vice presidential debate stage by Governor Tim Walz from Minnesota, where he basically said that women who have experienced miscarriages or are dealing with ectopic pregnancies will be denied care and left to die. And again, this is another falsehood from the enemy, blatantly false, because not only in Florida law, the statute, but also the Agency for Healthcare Administration's guidelines based on statute, women who deal with miscarriages, who have experienced the horrible circumstances of miscarriages, are absolutely entitled to getting care. And women who are facing life-threatening ectopic pregnancies are absolutely able to receive care. You may have seen a lot of the ads pushing a lot of the false narratives, true stories of women who have gone through horrible circumstances who were denied medical treatment because the doctors were, quote, afraid of Florida's abortion law. Those doctors, and I feel sorry, so sorry for those women, what they had to go through, because those doctors were playing politics with women's lives. That is unacceptable here in the state of Florida. And again, just part of the carnage of what the enemy is doing in distorting the truth about what Florida's law is. If we can go to the next slide here. I could spend 30, 45 minutes talking about this one slide alone. Again, another QR code from the Agency for Healthcare Administration. Florida is on the front lines providing support and resources to the women and children and the babies and the mothers here in the state of Florida in terms of just in one sector alone. And I don't have the numbers up there on the slide, but in just one segment of expenditures, the Florida legislature approved $456 million to support pregnant mothers and their babies in the first few months and years of pregnancy. And that doesn't take into account the Florida Kid Care Program, Medicaid expansion for pregnant mothers up to the age of 1, the baby being 1 year old, not counting the Pregnancy Care Network resources. And again, all of these numbers don't even take into account all the churches and ministries and nonprofits that are providing support on a whole variety of services to the mothers and the babies here in the state of Florida. We are truly a comprehensive pro-life state that is protecting not just mothers and babies up to the point of birth, but even beyond that. And the church is playing a huge role in stepping forward in that. If we can go to the next slide here. So I'm not going to go into every single detail here. I just want to paint a really broad picture of what's at stake here under Amendment 4. Every single one of these laws and rules are at risk if Amendment 4 passes. We already talked about the Heartbeat Protection Act, parental consent, where parents have to be able to give written consent before their minor can obtain an abortion. A physician's requirement, where a doctor has to be the one performing it, not just a front desk receptionist. We talked about licensing and sanitation, cleanliness requirements, taxpayer funding restrictions for abortions here in the state of Florida. So much, and again, this is just a fraction of it. As you'll find out a little bit later, there's so much more that is potentially on the chopping block in terms of good public policy that is standing for life here in the state of Florida because of Amendment 4's threat. Move to the next slide. Here's the reason why, and Pastor touched on this. I loved his presentation on this, but I'll go a little more in depth. The difference between a state statute and a constitutional amendment. See, this is crucial. A lot of people don't realize this. A state statute or a state law requires a simple majority of our state legislators, our elected representatives, and then the governor's signature to become law. And it is fairly simple for the legislature to come back, and they've done this plenty of times. So they'll come back in maybe the next year's session, and maybe they'll tweak some amendments, add some amendments, maybe change some language that needed to be fixed, or sometimes they'll repeal laws entirely. They can be able to do that. And the people can also be able to vote in new legislators to repeal bad laws that maybe the majority of the public feel is harmful. That's not what we're talking about with a state constitutional amendment, which is what Amendment 4 is. A state constitutional amendment requires 60% to be enshrined in our state constitution. The legislative and executive branches, our elected representatives, are powerless to do anything to fix the harms or dangers by a constitutional amendment. As Pastor was talking about, this isn't something like I love his point to say, the default should be to say no, and we need to research and we need to look into it, because again, when we alter our state constitution, it's not an easy, cheap fix. It's not a quick fix. Literally, it can only be changed or altered or repealed, a bad amendment, by another amendment. And that's a nearly impossible feat. In Florida's history, only one amendment has ever been repealed. One. And that was when Florida's threshold for passage of a constitutional amendment was 50% plus one. We're now at 60%. Folks, if Amendment 4 gets passed and gets enshrined in our state constitution, we will be looking at generations of time before the damage by this amendment can be fixed or healed or repaired. This is something that we cannot stand idly by as this battle is coming to our doorsteps. This is not something that the church can remain silent on. We have to remain engaged on that. So to dive into the specifics of Amendment 4, I'm going to be introducing our next speaker. Sarah Johnson is the statewide grassroots director for Vote No on 4 Florida, which is the flagship political committee that has been tirelessly working on defeating Amendment 4. She has worked on multiple campaigns, both large and small, for the past 15 years, and she has been a tireless warrior for truth, going from Miami to Pensacola and everywhere in between, sharing the truth and educating voters on Amendment 4. Before she comes up, if we could cue and play the next video before she comes up here.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gracie Christie, a Florida doctor and a proud mother of 5. As a radiologist, I use ultrasounds to help care for pregnant mothers and their babies. I want to discuss Amendment 4, an extreme abortion amendment on Florida's November ballot. Amendment 4 would change Florida's constitution to allow abortions at any time throughout the pregnancy, for almost any reason. My views on this amendment are shaped by faith, science, and common sense. Like so many of you, I believe in the sanctity of every human life, from conception to natural death. So I oppose Amendment 4. But even voters who don't share those views will have many reasons to vote no on Amendment 4. Amendment 4 is deceptive and dangerous. Unlike other amendments, none of its terms are defined, like government interference, viability, healthcare provider, or patient's health. And the word doctor never appears. That's the trick. No definitions means almost no limits. Instead of defining patient's health, Amendment 4 allows non-medical staff at abortion clinics to define it. That means even minor issues like stress will lead to late-term abortions. You see, Amendment 4 goes far beyond Roe v. Wade. It blocks any law that protects the unborn at any point during pregnancy. As a physician and a mom, I know that minors can't receive Tylenol without parental consent. But with Amendment 4, they could receive an abortion without parental consent. That's shocking, but it's a fact. Amendment 4 overturns Florida's existing parental consent law by replacing consent with notification and making abortion the only medical procedure that can be performed on a minor without a parent's permission. So what seems like a safeguard is just another loophole. Finally, Amendment 4 could even require taxpayer-funded abortions. 2 years ago, the same groups that wrote Amendment 4 passed a similar amendment in Michigan. These groups are now using that amendment to sue Michigan to force taxpayers to fund abortions. If Amendment 4 passes in Florida, they will try the same thing here. I know it can be hard to discuss abortion, but it's easy to talk about Amendment 4. No one wants to be deceived, and almost everyone opposes late-term abortion, taxpayer-funded abortion, and the elimination of parental consent. Anyone who opposes any of these things should vote no on Amendment 4. Christ said, "Whatsoever you do for the least of my brothers, you do unto me." The least among us have never been more vulnerable. Join me, stand up, and speak out, so every Floridian knows to vote no on Amendment 4.
Thank you so much for having us. Dr. Gracie Christie does, in 3 minutes, a very fine job, and I get to elaborate on that a little bit more. So we have to ask ourselves, how did we get to this place where an amendment like this is on Florida's November ballot? If we go to the next slide, we'll see who wrote this amendment. So this amendment comes to us as a citizens initiative amendment. That means a group formed a political committee, much like the one that I work for at Vote No, and they got to write the full text of the amendment that'll be enshrined in our state constitution, and they got to write the ballot summary that describes this amendment to us on our November ballot. So this group that was formed is Floridians Protecting Freedom. Their first funders are the ACLU, which is the American Civil Liberties Union, a group of attorneys, the George Soros-funded Open Society Fund, and Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood's regional facilities and even national organizations have contributed a significant amount of money to draft this amendment and then to get it put on our Constitution. And that process involves collecting petitions across the entire state of Florida. They collected around 1 million petitions, which is something that's disputed right now, how many of those were actually valid. But they collected that at the cost of about $15.5 million. Some say a lot more than that, but we know at least $15 million just went to putting this on our ballot. So we know that they were invested in this. Now, amendments, unlike candidates, have to run on the words on the ballot. You know, candidates have a first name and a last name, and then an entire platform that they get to change or redefine. If they misspeak, they can call that reporter right back and say, hey, would you change this quote? I'd like to adjust my position. But amendments have to run on the language that they wrote to start with. So let's take a look at the words of this amendment. If we go to the next slide, now I know there's a lot of words on here and we're going to break it down slowly. The ballot title for this amendment is the Amendment to Limit Government Interference with Abortion, but there is a deception hidden right in that title. It says that it's the amendment to limit government interference, but the first words of this amendment are that no law shall. So it's pretty much a ban on government interference at all as it relates to abortion. But limiting government interference are words that voters like, so that's what they made the title. They wrote the ballot summary, which is what we read that describes it to us. Now, by state law, ballot summaries are limited to being 75 words. That's about 49 words in that paragraph right there. But it has to be less than 75 because very often it hides a much longer body of policy that we as voters would have to be attorneys to understand. A lot of amendments are many pages long. Amendment 3, for example, you read through 3 or 4 pages to read the actual policy that we would be enshrining in our Constitution. But unlike most amendments, I am so sorry, I forgot I had a sign language interpreter. I will slow down. She's working real hard. So unlike other amendments, this amendment is just 34 words, and it's the underlined words at the bottom of this page. That is the full text of this amendment, and it comes in shorter than the entire ballot summary. So the words that they use to describe it to us as voters on our ballot is longer than the actual words that we would be enshrining into our state constitution. So now let's take a look at these words. We'll study the ballot summary because it has a few more words for normal people to understand. It says no law shall, and I'm going to point out right here in those first 3 words, there's not a time stamp in there. It's not no future law. It's no law in existence today and no future law. And no law doesn't just mean no law from the legislature. It means no executive action from the governor's office. It means no regulation from the Agency for Healthcare Administration. Nothing in government shall do what? These are the 4 verbs: prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion. Now, the word that always catches my eye of those 4 is the word delay, meaning we can't even slow down your access to abortion should we enshrine these words into our Constitution. So no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability. And this is the first word we find that has a couple different definitions, but none of them in this amendment. State law currently defines viability as when the baby is capable of surviving outside of the womb through common medical care. So this is a baby who can survive on its own, and that's different in every hospital, depending on technology. But this word merits a definition, and the sponsors didn't provide one. I'll take a moment to add that viability, when a baby can survive on its own, is about 24 weeks. That's 2 full trimesters. That's 5.5 months into pregnancy. So the first phrase of this amendment by itself in plain reading is extreme. No law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability. But here's the scariest word in this amendment. It's the small word that follows viability, and it's that word or. Meaning, even when a baby is capable of surviving outside of the womb, you still have access to abortion without delay under these parameters when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's health care provider. Now, none of those terms are either defined. So this health care provider, I picture someone in a white coat with a stethoscope around their neck in an exam room, but that's not necessarily what this means. We don't have a definition for healthcare provider in this amendment. No definitions for healthcare provider exists in Florida's chapter on abortion law 390. There are other places in state statute where we have several definitions for healthcare provider, but we don't know which ones the sponsors want. So this is a term that will land this amendment in court until we know who a healthcare provider is supposed to be. And what does this healthcare provider evaluate for a post-viable abortion? Just the patient's health. There's no requirement for any diagnosis. It's not just limited to physical health either. It could include mental health. So something as simple as mental stress or a common symptom of pregnancy could merit, at the advisement of a healthcare provider, a post-viable abortion. And that's the first sentence of this amendment. The second sentence doesn't exist in the full text of the amendment. It's where they reference Article 10, Section 22. It says, this amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. So what this sounds like is, hey, you get to keep your constitutional right to parental notification. We're not going to change that. What it doesn't tell you, specifically doesn't tell you, is that in the lower body of law, under the Constitution is state law and state statutes, parents right now have the much more robust right to parental consent. And the difference between notification and consent is telling you your minor is going to have an abortion versus asking your permission for a minor to have an abortion. So if we enshrine this in our state constitution, parents could lose the right to give permission prior to their minor receiving an abortion. This would make abortion the only procedure that a minor could undergo without her parents' permission. That is so extreme. But because of who the sponsors are, we also have to worry about what this amendment doesn't say. And Dr. Gracie Christie touched on this. The ACLU, who sponsored this amendment, helped draft it and has helped fund the campaign, did the exact same thing in Michigan 2 years ago. And Michigan said yes and put that amendment in their constitution. And it wasn't until this summer that the ACLU sued the state of Michigan under the amendment that they helped pass, saying that without access to taxpayer funding of elective abortions, Michiganders experience a delay in their access to abortion. And the ACLU, when they drafted this amendment here in Florida, were sure to say, no law shall delay your access to abortion should we pass this. So the same sponsors of this amendment pursued that threat of litigation, specifically using the word delay, and they drafted that here in this amendment. So we believe they would pursue the same lawsuit here in Florida. So that's what the words say, and that's what the words don't say. And I'm going to remind you that they spent $15 million just putting this on the ballot. This was very intentional, the words that they put in and the words that they left out. So if we can go to the next slide, this is the elevator speech that I would give you to give to your neighbor. This amendment has no definitions. Every seeming limitation is actually a loophole, meaning that this would allow an abortion well beyond when science says a baby is capable of feeling pain. That limit of viability even is 2 months after science tells us a baby is capable of feeling pain. So there are no definitions. There are no doctors. Healthcare provider is not limited to being a doctor. There's no parental consent in this amendment. Consent and notification are different. Sometimes you have to tell your neighbor about that. And this could open the door to taxpayer-funded elective abortion. So this is the elevator speech that I would give you. And if you'd like to know what you can do, that's on the next slide. You can share our videos. We have plenty of videos like the video from Dr. Gracie Christie, shorter videos, longer videos, 15 seconds for the younger audience with a shorter attention span. And you can share them in churches like we just did. You can text them to your friends. So if you are not on social media, you can email them, you can text them. There are plenty of opportunities. You can show them to your neighbor in your driveway if you have to. You can sign up for our emails. You can canvass and phone bank. We have a regional field director, Amy Southerly, who mentioned she is looking for people to hold yard signs and hand out palm cards on election day at your precinct. It'd be super helpful because a lot of voters have questions about amendments. So if you'd like to do that, you can contact her on our website. And you can talk about Amendment 4. With what I've just explained, you don't have to be, and our science says this, you don't have to be pro-life to oppose this amendment. If you are pro-life or believe in the sanctity of life, you must oppose Amendment 4. But if you're just a common sense voter, you should also oppose Amendment 4, whether you are pro-life or not. So tell everyone that you know about this terrible amendment. Well, let's go to the next slide. This is my final slide. It has another QR code. We are technology forward and data driven on this campaign. Here's how you can get involved. You can sign up to phone bank and canvass here. You can request a palm card or a yard sign. So there are a lot of opportunities to do that. And while you click on that, I'm going to invite up Pastor Kevin Baird. He is a pastor of 40 years and the director of pastoral ministries at the Florida Family Voice, where he leads the Florida Capital Project Initiative, engaging Florida pastors in the civic mission field. And we have a slide coming up for him, too.
Appreciate it. Again, thank you all for being here tonight. We appreciate it very much. My assignment with Florida Family Voice is to reach out to the 17,000 self-identified Bible-believing / evangelical churches here in Florida and solicit them to come across the bridge in order to engage their civic government. The reason we do that is because we believe that this is a gospel issue and that the church has a place in this space. And if the church arises and awakens and it enters into this sphere, how many of you know it's game over? It's game over. So the church is plan A, and there is no plan B. It's the linchpin. And if God's people invade the space, it will reflect God's values and certainly his kingdom. You can't go through the Bible without running into some form of civic government. Somebody's running into a king, a pharaoh, a governor. Somebody is always running into government, and we should be running into government as well. Now, I wish I could clone Anchor Faith and have about 1,000 of you spread out by way of churches all over Florida, because you all get it. Your pastors get it. They teach you the scripture, and you're very involved at the local level, state level, and national level, and you're to be commended. Thank you for being one of those linchpins in our state. And we're going to need you to share information with your friends, your neighbors, potentially other church leaders, so we can get the word out, so we can begin to deal with what we consider to be an unrighteous ballot initiative. And it comes as no surprise probably to many of you, with you being the exception, that there are many churches and pastors out there that are squeamish and they are reluctant to step into this particular lane. And there are reasons, I would suppose. Some have simple fears. Perhaps they don't understand how to do it. Maybe they've not been trained or studied on how to do it. I suspect some are concerned as to potential divisions that could come up within the congregation when they begin to talk about this fear. And some I know have compartmentalized their faith to the point where they feel like politics gets sort of like the get out of talking about card free. We can set you off to the side and we won't worry about you, and we'll just talk about everything else. And as we know, God's word speaks to this arena as well. But even this past week, my phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and it was a pastor, and asked me the simple question related to Amendment 4. Can I really talk about this in my church and not get in trouble with the IRS or the government? And my answer was simply yes. And I want to explain a little bit as to how that has happened and your confidence that you can step into this space and speak about things just like this. Next slide, please. The history of the Johnson Amendment. The reason most people feel like the church or pastors feel like they can't talk about anything remotely political is because of this thing called the Johnson Amendment. In 1954, then Senator Lyndon Johnson in Texas was running a re-election campaign. There were two Houston businessmen who did not want him to be re-elected to that Senate seat, and so they created two nonprofits, 501c3s, in order that they could receive donations and through those donations begin to do electioneering in order to defeat Senator Johnson. Well, the senator ended up winning. And on July 2nd, 1954, late at night, there was an IRS code going through the Senate, and they slipped in what is called the Johnson Amendment, which has now been used mythically to tell us that the church and pastors have no voice in political matters. Well, let me first state this, that when Johnson's staff was asked as to whether or not this amendment would apply to the church or to pastors, in 1954, the very ones who wrote the amendment said it was never designed to hinder the church in any way, shape, or form with regards to political or First Amendment speech. And yet to this very day, there's this myth that's been perpetrated upon us that somehow if we say something remotely political, someone's going to come in, shut the doors, take away our ability to give tax donation status to parishioners, and we walk in fear. And so if we'll go to the next slide, you'll see a QR code will come up with that. And again, you can get your phones out, and it will link you to the Alliance Defending Freedom. The ADF is a First Amendment group that litigates free speech issues all across the nation. Thousands of lawyers are attached to the ADF, and they have a detailed section here as to what pastors can and what churches can and cannot do. Now, to tell you a little bit about the ADF, about 15 years ago, they had what was called the Pulpit Initiative. I was pastoring a local church at that particular time, and they solicited pastors across the nation to preach on one Sunday a year a sermon that specifically dove into a perceived political topic. We were then to package up that message back in the day where we still had cassettes, believe it or not, or CDs or whatever we had, and mail it to the IRS and simply say, please litigate me. Please litigate me. They did this for over a decade. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sermons from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pastors, all sent to the IRS, specifically saying things, hoping to pull the trigger that the IRS would litigate. Why? So it could be found unconstitutional, which the ADF believes, and many believe that it is. Well, guess what happened? Not one pastor nor one church was ever approached with regards to any of those messages that were sent into the IRS. Why is that? Well, it's because you get more mileage out of the fear of something than you do with the reality of something. And so you can hit that QR code and you will see a list that answers, I would think, every question you might have with regards to what a church or as a pastor, what you can say and be in, safe and confident territory. I want to go to the next slide and just take a few moments and just sort of encapsulate it in three specific areas. I always remember these three areas, and you can share them with others. I hope you do. And again, your church does such a great job with this that this is just probably redundancy, but I want you to have the facts so you can begin to spread the word as well on these three things. The first one is what we call the 15% incidental activity guideline. Now, the IRS, before it sticks its nose into any nonprofit, uses as its measuring stick as to whether 15% of the activity of that nonprofit is stepping outside of its stated mission. Now, what that means is if you add up all the activity that goes on in church life, now think about that for a minute. You have Sunday mornings, you have Wednesday nights, you have youth ministry, you probably have benevolence ministries, you might have women's Bible studies, men's Bible studies. Think of all of the activity that goes on in a church, and 15% can be used in order to speak or to function in perceived political activity. 15% before it would even trigger any thought of the IRS looking at anybody. Now, hear me when I say this, these numbers haven't even been litigated yet. In other words, that we're just using what probably would be standard operating procedure from the IRS. Now, let's just take, for example, the normal American church service that lasts 75 minutes. In 75 minutes, if you put 15% on that, that's approximately 10 to 11 minutes. So every Sunday, you could spend 10 to 11 minutes talking about perceived political things. Now, no church does that. I didn't do that, and I was a fairly and highly engaged pastor. So what happens is those 10 or 11 minutes begin to accrue to the next week. And if you didn't do it the next week, it would accrue to the next week until finally, if you just let it go for 52 weeks, you would literally have 48 hours of time that you could spend talking about perceived political speech, and it wouldn't trigger an IRS audit. I'm telling you, it's fear that keeps us out of this realm. And thank God for Pastor Glisson and this church who teaches the scripture clearly in this area. The second thing I'll say is this. I remind pastors that they are citizens and churches are organizations. Now that sounds simple, but it's important. As a pastor, I don't lose my citizenship when I step behind the pulpit. You're an American citizen. You've got free speech no matter where you go, even at work. And so if a pastor comes to work and he's standing behind the pulpit, he still has the ability as a citizen in person to say pretty much anything he would like to say. In fact, there really is no restriction by and large upon a pastor in his preaching. Now, a church is an organization, and it indeed has some regulation because we shouldn't probably be soliciting donations in order to fund campaigns. That might not be the smartest thing to do. So there's probably some wisdom and common sense for nonprofits not to get involved in that. But pastors have total ability to speak, and churches have total ability to begin to speak to those policies that begin to affect them as a people. In other words, as a church, we can advocate for anything we want to. So when it comes to Amendment 4, we believe that this topic, abortion, directly affects our values. All of us can speak to this with complete confidence and freedom that we're not only being faithful unto God, which should be our most important concern, but we are in no way violating any sort of government regulation or law that somehow we've dipped over into some wrong lane. And lastly, I'll say this, number 3, that we distinguish between educating and electioneering and advocating and campaigning. What this means is this, that yours and my value system is as legitimate to talk about any place, any time, in any sphere as anyone else's. We get to come to the table as believers of public policy, public discussion, and potential constitutional amendments, and we can articulate our faith without fear of reprisal because our value system is just as valid as anyone else's. And may I suggest to you that our value system may indeed be the best one since we have thousands of years of fruit from the Bible that tells us exactly that God's way is indeed the best way, right? That's exactly right. So I want to encourage you as a people and as a church, you're doing a great job already. But I want you to be confident. I want you to keep on the tip of the sphere. And I want you to know that we are cheering you on from Florida Family Voice. We wish we had more like you. So God bless you in this work. And it's my great honor now to introduce to you the governor's liaison to faith and community, Eric Dellenbach. Eric has led foundations, Tim Tebow's foundation, Chris Tomlin's foundation. Eric is a great, great speaker, and he's going to tie all this up this evening, and I'm just happy he's with us on this tour. God bless you, Eric.
He doesn't know that I kind of feel like I'm part of the family already, you know? I think this is my third trip to Anchor Faith in a year and a half, so starting to be my church away from church, you know? Listen, isn't it funny when you walk in? I kind of remember a similar feeling when I was here with you guys before, of just every once in a while you don't know you need something like what we did in worship a little bit ago, and then you're in it, and you're like, oh, I needed that today. So thank you. I don't know, I tried to fist bump the worship team leader, and we got into a fist bump, handshake kind of weird thing over there. I don't know what was happening, but we survived. Thanks for the introduction, Kevin. Bruce, thanks so much for letting me be part of this tour. I've lost track of our cities. I really did today try to figure out. I think we're city 10. We leave tonight. We'll be in Orlando and Clearwater tomorrow. And we've covered literally every inch from, well, soon to be Miami to Pensacola. And so this is an important topic. We're here today because this topic matters. I think I brought this up last time, but I never meet a group of Floridians where I don't tell you, when you look at that title, the Governor's Liaison for Faith and Community, you should be thrilled as Floridians that that title exists in your state. I always want to keep perspective on this, right? Is that this isn't something that we're waking up today and all of a sudden we're talking about an amendment. This is 6 years in the making when the governor first created a faith and community initiative. And so when you look at this, here's some perspective. There's only 14 states right now in the United States of America that have any attention on faith and community. There's 2, yours in Arkansas, just recently Arkansas, where my role exists in the executive office of the governor. So there was something happening in Florida that we didn't even understand that's been going on for 6 years. So let me say, first and foremost, on behalf of the governor, on behalf of the First Lady, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for the desire to be educated. I love that you said that, Pastor Earl, the desire to be educated. Who in the world would not want to be educated? Well, that's another different day. So, but I'm grateful that you want to be educated. Can I tell you that our mantra on the bus is that we will sleep on November 6th, the day after the election. We're now down to 2 weeks and 6 days from tonight. So this is a sprint. It is no longer a marathon. We started a lot of these works. Some people, Sarah's been working on a really long time, but a lot of us started in April and May, and it felt so far away, and yet now we're 2 weeks and 6 days away. We must start sprinting. The second thing is I have a deep feeling, a really, really deep feeling, that if this amendment passed, people would wake up with a regret that I cannot describe to you on November 6th, that they didn't talk about this more and do more. When you hear these speakers start to lay out something that can be a generational change in the state of Florida, they're not exaggerating that. Constitutional amendments don't go away, right? And this is a very interesting move that's been chosen to have this on our ballot. And so we're asking you to speak about it. The other thing I want to say as I set a tone for my little time with you is that this talk, although for you, isn't just for you. Right? I want you to hear it. I want you to be educated. But please know this. It cannot stop with you in the room tonight. The math on this thing is we need about 4.1 million Floridians to vote against this to defeat this amendment. 4.1 million. And so it doesn't matter how big the rooms we are, we're not speaking to 4.1 million people directly. So our chief of staff actually just kind of for fun one day said, I want everyone that walks out of one of these rooms to write down 100 names and think for the next 2 weeks and 6 days who you can tell about this amendment, who you can educate. And can I tell you that my fear is that a lot of times we think, okay, who can I tell? And we think of someone that might be across the political aisle, or maybe we think about someone who might think differently than us. And I do think those conversations are important. In fact, I would go so far as to say I think those conversations are healthy. I think we as Americans should be having those discussions. However, I also would tell you, don't skip the people that you think like you. Because here's the problem. And I've been there. I lived this life like every one of us in this room. You walk in, you're all passionate, you get your little thing, you're in your little box, you're making sure you don't cheat and look at anyone else, and you start marking your R's and your D's down the page, and you get to these constitutional amendments, and if you have not educated yourself, it is confusing. There's 6 of them on this one. There's 2 of them, 3 and 4, that you've heard the most about, I promise, that we're suggesting, as you said, Pastor Earl, at least you start with no and then educate. And so I just want to tell you, if you think you're ruling out, I shouldn't talk to my friends, they're going to know, they're conservative, this thing was meant to deceive them. That's all there is to it. So here's a few things as you head into this last 2 weeks. One, I want to remind you every time that we're together at any point, I know I've gotten to say it to my family here at Anchor Faith, there's 20,000 faith institutions in this state. There's 110,000 nonprofits. There's 70% of the state still says they're Christian. 3% say they're Jewish, 3% say they're of other faith, and 24% say no faith. So I'll just do some quick math. That's 76% of our state that say that they are faith-based. If you take that times, pick a moment, which I did, in Florida population, that's 16.9 million people in the state of Florida say that faith matters to them. Now, you would do the math pretty quickly that in a 23 million person state, that is well over half. It makes it the largest people group in the state of Florida. It makes it the most powerful people group in the state of Florida. And if you only could dream that we would talk faith before we talk politics, we wouldn't stand here tonight, right? But we don't. And so we roll on, and I want to tell you that Florida has, from day one, been committed to faith and community. Now, a couple things, you know this already, a few of you, but like we have the nation's only red phone that allows faith leaders like Pastor Earl to call straight into the executive office of the governor and get their questions answered about the state administration. Why do we do it? Because the faster we can help our churches and faith institutions get back to serving their communities, the better our vulnerable citizens get served. So because, again, and Pastor Kevin said this we believe, and government believes this too, that nobody serves the communities better than the faith and community organizations of that community. The second thing we have is a Hope Florida Hope Line. If you haven't heard about that, it's amazing work by the First Lady. Whole nother thing I could talk about. It's one telephone number for all need in the state of Florida. Do you know how hard state government is? I'm sure some of you have been in need. It's brutal to navigate that system. And now there's a one-stop shop telephone number through Hope Florida, if you need that. It was used a lot for this hurricane and the last two hurricanes. And so we have that going in our state. So this wasn't something we got caught flat-footed. But I will tell you that many people, when they listen to me, I think they hear what's being said by Sarah, and they say, that's a good presentation, and I cannot believe that anyone could ever gather and think that removing parental consent is a good idea. I don't know. I've never been in that room, honestly. I've been across all party lines, no problem. I've not been in the room where people think removing parental consent. But so I think the tendency might be to think, well, I don't know how hard we need to push on this. So let me give you this really, really quick fact. 7 states have faced an amendment like this. All 7 states passed. So if you need me to say to you, the stakes are high, they're high. We're still polling in the 58 to 62% yes on this. So it's not like when we walk out of here, oh man, we're just celebrating, we're just doing this tour to affirm something that's already been decided. It's not been decided. Florida is being attacked intentionally because Florida, as a state, has stood as a bastion of hope for the country. And if you don't think the rest of the states are watching, you're out of your mind. They want to see if a state like Florida that has been free now, and been acting like it, if we get taken down, the other states will fall. There's 10 other states right now with an amendment like this, just to give you a feel of what's happening in the country. So what's the why? Why does it matter, right? Aside from the fact that I think Sarah hits the nail on the head when she says it's just bad legislation. The truth is, I would have a conversation, no problem, with anybody that claimed to be, wherever they feel to be on this, I would talk to a person and say, can we really be honest about what this legislation means and what it doesn't say? But here's the why that motivates me. Right now, we sit under a heartbeat bill. And the difference between that heartbeat bill and this amendment is 40,000 babies per year in the state of Florida. Now, the team knows if I start to discuss with you 40,000 babies, I cry. So I don't do it anymore. So what I want you to do instead is you picture how you picture 40,000 people. Is it 2/3 of an NFL stadium? Couple arenas full? This room filled up 30 times? I need that number to resonate. I'm a person who believes in the moments when you see things you can't unsee. I think that's something we need to see. That's what's at stake. That's just the difference between today and this amendment. The second thing that's at stake is this little set of words where people are starting to say that Florida would become an abortion tourism destination state. I consider that a dumpster fire of words. Like when you think about our state, be proud, right? We're a tourism state. I'm a native Floridian also. I love our tourism. But to think that we would become the abortion hub for the conservative Southeast United States, on top of that, what we know, because we used to be a 24-week state, is that we were a hub for Central and South America for countries that they would come here to have their abortions. We cannot go there. One pastor said, and this has been ringing around in my head, you think about the things you hear. One pastor said, we cannot make it where the most dangerous place to be in the state of Florida is in a mother's womb. Boy, he hit me. He got me on that. So here's what we're asking. First and foremost, prayer. Not like that prayer that comes at the end because it's a last resort, like a first responding, first line of defense prayer. Now, why prayer matters, aside from the fact that it's powerful, is that we believe discernment is the key to this thing. So in this moment, I always want to say, like, we understand, Bruce laid out perfectly, we are dealing with lies. So discernment matters. But everyone always wants me to talk about Amendment 3, our marijuana amendment that's coming through too. Can I just tell you two things about that, just because I want to speak on it for 1 second? Do you know how many inmates are currently in our prison system for use, possession, or sale of marijuana? 0. Not one inmate. Now, if they used, possessed, or sold, and then got in a car accident and killed somebody, they're in prison, but that's not for those 3 things. Do you know another thing? If you read the amendment, I'm encouraging you to go educate yourself. But if you read Amendment 3, it's been funded $80 million plus by one company. You think that's benevolence? Just because they want you to have marijuana in your backyard? That's not what's happening. The other thing that's happening is that they say that they're going to fund education. In the language of the amendment, Sarah mentioned 3-4 pages of language of the amendment, not one word about funding education. So how is that the everything they have in their commercial? It's the point of their commercial. Anyways, we need discernment. We need prayer. The second thing is we need you talking about it. I'd love for you to consider taking us up on the 100-person challenge. If there was a theme verse for what we're asking, it comes from Hosea 4:6. Hosea 4:6 says, "My people were destroyed for a lack of knowledge." This is why we so appreciate you, Pastor O. This is why you're such a great friend. You're a great friend way past the amendment. But I mean, he is trying to help his people, God's people, not be destroyed just because they didn't know. What motivates me, what motivates me is that I want on November 6th, no pastor to say I didn't preach about it because I didn't know. Now, if they didn't preach about it, that's not me. That's not me and them. But if they didn't preach about it because they didn't know, it's my fault. And so I am motivated to continuously be out talking about this. And then finally, on that point, I want to say one pastor recently said, and I thought this encapsulated it so well, he was tapping the side of the podium, which usually means the pastor's about to unleash it or they're nervous. That seems to be the two things. And he was tapping the side of the podium, and he stepped aside and he said, "I know that my church doesn't want me to get political. I know you don't want me to get political, but in this case, politics got theological and stepped into God's kingdom, and I must talk about it." And this is the tone that's being taken by so many churches that we're so grateful for, like this one. We need to grow the movement. That's point 3. Please grow. Please tell people about it. There's gold out in the lobby. There's yard signs. You can't find those things anywhere. I know they're gold because I get asked for them everywhere I go. There's yard signs. There's palm cards. There's ways to put social media posts. Please, please allow people. And if you want to be crazy in today's culture, ask for a conversation. My wife put a post on social media. She said, "I'm very passionate about this. I would love to have a discussion." Do things like that. Please, please help us grow. And then finally, what I want to say to you is that Florida is ready for life. So let's just talk for a second about November 5th, we knocked down a bad piece of legislation. Do you know that for 6 years, we have been changing the foster care system in Florida? Part of the message I brought you, part of Care Portal, part of what we talked about, is that sitting here today, there are 6,000 less children in foster care than there were 5 years ago. It's 30% reduction of foster care in the state of Florida. The Department of Elder Affairs, the Department of Juvenile Affairs, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Agency for People with Disabilities, all have had radical change. And the radical change has simply been that those agencies are now opening up the needs of the most vulnerable to the faith institutions of our state, who already had their heart beating for that. And those needs are being met by people who sat in these buildings every Saturday and Sunday and said, "My heart beats for this, how do I do it?" And the state of Florida is being changed from the inside out because our faith institutions have gotten involved and seen the need of the most vulnerable. Well, what's that mean about this amendment? It means that on November 6th, we are ready for mamas and babies. Because it's not fair to just be against legislation or to just be just be pro-birth. We've got to also be pro-life for the rest of life. And so I just want to tell you, that's where your state stands. I don't get to say this much because I'm not often in a church environment, but I think what was happening in the state of Florida, this is my personal opinion, is that we 6 years ago when all that stuff was being launched, were building a little bitty ark and we didn't know what the rain was, but it was being built. And so sitting here today, we as a state are ready to have those discussions. On November 6th, I'll be back out around the state talking about the fact that we have more moms having more babies with special needs and more babies into low-income homes than we've had in the past 50 years. And we as the faith institutions of the state have a responsibility in that. And so I want to thank you for the gap you've stood in, Pastor Earl. We've never been invited in something like this. I told him that tonight. I've spoken at a lot of things. I've been even given your pulpit twice, which I appreciate. But we've never been invited to have an entire engagement like this. Right? But if we do this, it starts to break those crazy laws that they tell us we're not allowed. I don't mean break the laws, break the crazy rules that they tell us we're not allowed to do. And so I just want to say thank you and God bless and hand it back over to Bruce.
You've heard an all-star cast of speakers educating and informing all of us on what's taking place. The other side, who has put this together, has spent $40 million to pass this amendment. $40 million. Our side, which is a collective group, $5 million. That's all we've been able to get. $40 million to $5 million to get this passed. When I was in junior high school, I read Mad Magazine every month. Some of you may remember Mad Magazine. Right? And I remember a little cartoon, and that cartoon it was like a graffiti wall. And on that graffiti wall, it was written, "God is dead," signed Nietzsche. And then there was a big X through that. And next to it, it said, "Nietzsche is dead," signed God. Our God is not dead. Our God is alive. Our God loves miracles. He loves to perform miracles. You know the story about the little boy had 2 fish and 5 loaves. And what'd they do? Our Lord miraculously fed 5,000. So we're in the miracle business, and you are now commissioned to go forth and be a part of a miracle to take this crazy ballot initiative off and defeat it. So, Pastor Earl, thank you. Thank you, everyone here at Anchor Faith Church. Just wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. We're going to sneak out, I think, and we're in the lobby area, and some of you may have to go to the restroom. We're right across the way. So we look forward to meeting you. So thank you, Pastor Earl.
Amen. Again, they're going to slip out and go back to the table. Obviously, we want to give to the Lord. We always do offering. As our ushers come and get set, I got a couple closing thought processes real quick. Number one, they will legislate, or they will go to court to get taxpayer money so that abortions can become free. Although it's not free to the person getting them performed, it will come through government or tax-paying money. However, right now, the average to adopt is $20,000 to $45,000, of which you do not receive taxpayer money to continue to help a child continue in life. Brittany, would you stand? Brittany obviously oversees, is the director at St. Gerard here. Amen. And you know, we support St. Gerard. And obviously, this is dear to that ministry as well and what we do there. Obviously, you know, Brittany is a wealth of information, and obviously we stay connected there. You know, she's here with us, so, you know, you can continue to pull on information from her as we continue on, and she can give you plenty of victories of where those that have come into that ministry's home, you know, that facility, they were on the verge. And because they took time to talk to them, we get to see them give birth. How many do we have right now that are going to be giving birth this year?
We have 3 girls. We have a baby very soon.
Very soon. 9 girls. So, you know, that's 9 girls that are choosing life. Amen? All right. So, again, thank you, Brittany. Just want to remind you of those things, that it's important for us to be actively engaged. And at the end of the day, we as believers, as they've articulated it so well, you have a right to express your belief. People can choose to do what they want to do. We are making a choice. We're not stopping abortion. Abortion is legal in every 50 states. But what we are doing is we are giving terms that are better, and we are at least expressing our side of that. At the end of the day, you know, if the whole state wanted to go beyond 60, at least we did our part. But as, you know, Eric said, if 76% say they're attached to faith, this should be a slam dunk. It should be. But that doesn't mean it is. And it won't be if you don't vote. So make sure you vote. Amen? All right.